This is Margie Russell, Executive Director of NYARM. We're here today to address the good cause eviction, but a little bit about NYARM. NYARM has been around for over 60 years. It was created at the time the Mitchell-Lama program came in, and during those years, 60 years and more, the majority of the people who managed apartment buildings were the families who owned them. And this is well before the condo and the co-op craze, of course, but when the Mitchell-Lamas were being built, there were now people who were employed from the outside to manage these buildings, and they needed to be professionally trained and continually trained. And so the New York Association of Realty Managers was born of that, and over the last 60 years, we have specialized in the multifamily housing sector, although mixed-use buildings are certainly part of that. I have been the executive director of NYARM for more than 20 years, and before that, I managed co-op and condo buildings in Manhattan, opened co-ops while they were converting, and condos and opening the building. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm going to go into today's program, starting with the president of SPONY. She's going to give you a quick introduction about herself and the organization and what they've been doing.
Okay, thanks, Margie.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Margie said, my name is Ann Korchak, and I'm currently the president of the Small Property Owners of New York. SPONY is a group of small property owners, primarily, family-run, multifamily buildings. We are typically, still family run, and the families, the buildings have typically been in, the families for multiple generations. In my case, it's my husband's grandparents, immigrants here to America, and, they achieved the American dream, as small property owners, and, something that generations of New Yorkers have done. And, that the ability to do that is really being challenged, and future generations of, immigrants are unlikely, to be able to do the same thing that my husband's family did. So I came to, kind of advocacy by accident. Early in COVID, I saw a post in a landlord group chat looking for owners on the Upper West Side to join a meeting with Senator Brian Benjamin. And that's how I came to join SPONY. And, I just met an incredibly interesting and diverse group of people, who were, fighting for their family businesses. And, in the time since COVID began, SPONY has probably met with, we're coming up to close to 200 elected officials, from the city council level, up to, staffers in Senator Gillibrand or Senator Schumer's offices. We've testified, at countless hearings, city council, state hearings. And one of our members, Jan Lee, was actually invited to testify before a congressional hearing earlier or late last year, regarding the eviction moratorium. So we, spend a lot of time, speaking to lawmakers, speaking to the media, about, the cancel rent rhetoric that we heard early on during the pandemic, and then the eviction moratorium. And very recently we pivoted, to good cause eviction, because we see this as a bill that will really just be, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, particularly for the small property owners. So I'm, super grateful to have this chance to, to be part of this event today. And Margie, I thank you, for putting this together and, giving us the chance to kind of let other people in the industry know, how important it is that we all kind of join forces and, push back against this legislation that will impact, all of us.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you very much. Alexander, this is your time. If you could please tell us about your firm and your background, and then we are all anxiously waiting to hear what you have to say.
Well, Margie, thank you for that introduction and for inviting me to speak here today to the group. It looks like a very robust group of people on the Zoom conference here, so I'm really eager to get started and to discuss this bill. Although the prospect of this bill, I'm not excited about, and neither, I gather, are most of you. So, my name is Alexander Lycoyannis. You can call me Alex for short. I'm a partner at Rosenberg Estis. We are I think, the premier real estate law firm in New York City. Our offices are in Midtown Manhattan. I've been with the firm for 20 years, and I specialize in commercial and residential real estate litigation, including landlord-tenant litigation. This good cause eviction bill that we're all talking about today, it's been in the works for a while. It was first introduced a number of years ago in early iterations of the HSTPA, which is a whole nother thing that we could talk about. This was actually part of that. It was taken out before the final bill was passed. But essentially, what good cause eviction is, or what it's attempting to do, is it is attempting to impose what I would refer to as a draconian system of new system of rent regulation on almost all of what are currently free market apartments. So everyone, I'm sure most of us on the call know about the rent stabilization law. About 1 million or so apartments in the city are subject to it, and it has its own many rules and requirements and regulations that apply to those apartments. But there are about 1.6 million tenants in New York State that are residents of free market apartments. So just as is the case with commercial tenancies, free market residential tenancies are subject to the terms of the lease, and the rent that's paid is whatever the parties agree to in the lease document or otherwise in the rental agreement. So and that's again the free market, the free bargain and exchange that we all engage in most sectors of our lives. But what this good cause eviction bill intends to do is it tends to destroy the free market of housing, or pretty much all of what remains of the free market in housing in New York State, and impose this new system that would be quite a change, and in a lot of ways it would be even stricter than rent stabilization. There's been some misconceptions about what the law says that you might have heard about or read about, and I want to correct some of those today in the course of the discussion. I guess as a preliminary matter, there've also been maybe some misconceptions about whether this is already law or whether this is something that is in effect right now. It is not in effect right now. Right now, the bill has been introduced in the legislature. There was a hearing in the New York State Senate on January 7th, at which I testified in opposition to the bill. It has not moved. I'm not aware that any action has been taken on the bill in the Assembly. If you keep up with the news and you keep up with what's happening, it seems that this bill is being pushed by a very left-wing contingent in the Democratic Party. The Democratic leaders and the more moderate Democrats don't seem to be very eager to get on board with this bill. It remains to be seen how the politics develop over the coming months in the legislative session, which goes through June. But as of now, there's not been a lot of movement. My personal expectation is we're going to see the budget negotiations. I think that's going to dominate over the next number of months. And my best guess is that if there is going to be a real push for this, it's going to occur later on in the spring. But that's all subject to change at a moment's notice. So, that's kind of the, a broad outline of the politics of what good cause eviction is and where it stands. So what is good cause eviction? So, there's, again, you might have heard some things in the news or by word of mouth. What it says is that for a tenant in possession of what is currently a free market apartment, okay, there are 8 different bases or 8 different good causes for eviction. Unless one of those good causes are met, you cannot evict the tenant. And what's notable is that one of the 8 bases to evict is not expiration of the lease. So if you have a lease with a tenant, a 1-year lease that you signed on January 1st of this year, and this bill were to become law on June 30th of this year, when that lease expires December 31st and January 1st, 2023 comes around, you cannot commence a holdover proceeding against that tenant. Essentially, what this bill would do is it would essentially eradicate the concept of a lease. So if you have that lease, January 1st, 2023 comes around, but that tenant continues to pay the rent and doesn't cause an issue, doesn't cause a nuisance, doesn't, smash walls or do anything offensive to anyone else, you have to continue renting to that tenant. Okay. So let's, I guess using that hypothetical tenant who signed the lease on January 1st of this year, let's look at some of the good causes for eviction. So the first basis for good cause is quite simply that the tenant failed to pay the rent that's due and owing. Okay, that seems pretty elementary. The landlord-tenant relationship is you have a tenant who pays rent in exchange for the right to occupy an apartment or another housing accommodation. It seems pretty elementary that if you don't pay the rent, you can't keep living there. Okay, but that obligation to pay rent is subject to a couple of what I would consider pretty onerous provisions. Number one, what the bill says is that the rent due and owing or any part thereof couldn't have resulted from a rent increase which is unreasonable. Okay, what does unreasonable mean? I don't know. The statute doesn't say, or the bill doesn't say. Who's going to decide what's unreasonable? Ultimately, a judge. Let's say you have this tenant in possession and you say to the tenant, okay, it's January 1st, 2023, your lease expires. I want to raise your rent by 1%. Okay, so the rent is $2,000. I want to raise it $20, 1%. So your rent's now going to be $2,020. Tenant says, no, I'm not paying that. That's an unreasonable rent increase. So you take the tenant to court and you say the tenant didn't pay $2,020. And the tenant says, no, I think that 1% rent increase is unreasonable. Okay. I think most judges would probably agree that 1% is not unreasonable. But the point is, you would have to hire an attorney if you own a building in the corporate form to make that case to a judge that your rent increase is not unreasonable. Okay. So the statute goes on, or the bill goes on to say that if the rent increase is either 3% or 1.5 times the consumer price index, whichever is higher, there is a rebuttable presumption that it is unreasonable. So I know that CPI, I think, you look at various indices as to what CPI is. I think I just saw one that it's about 7%. So, let's again take the hypothetical $2,000 a month rent. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that CPI is 5%, right? So you raise the rent $2,000 to $2,050. Okay, take your tenant to court. They didn't pay the $2,050. The court's going to say that's 5%. That's CPI. This rent increase is presumptively unreasonable. You've got to prove to me why it's not unreasonable. So then you have to go through, open your books, go through all your expenses, and make a case to a judge, right? Why this is why $50 is a reasonable rent increase. Okay, I enjoy doing these Zooms, these presentations to everybody, but unfortunately it would probably cost more than $50 to have me or another attorney make that case to a judge. So what is the natural result of that? The natural result of that is that most owners are going to think twice about raising the rent at all. Okay, so what you have here isn't a rent control system that says you can't raise it more than X%. What you have here is a rent control system that is doesn't have a specific number, but it's going to make all owners think about raising the rent to any degree whatsoever. Okay, that the rent provision also states that in addition, it also gives the tenant a defense that in addition to the rent increase being unreasonable, it also says, or the rent increase was imposed for the purpose of circumventing the intent of this article. Again, the intent of the article is not defined. What does that mean? It means that even if you establish to the court that the rent increase is reasonable, the tenant can come back and say, no. Even the $50, even though it's reasonable, the owner's just trying to do this just to try to circumvent the intent of the article. So then the attorney again has to say, oh no, the intent of the article is, whatever the parties argue it is. So again, what this is doing in this first provision, the most basic provision, is there are these little bombs that are waiting to be detonated, that are waiting to blow up in the owner's face when the owner tries to do something as basic as enforce the rent obligation. So it gets more interesting and worse from there. Another good cause basis is that the tenant's violating a substantial obligation of the tenancy other than the obligation to surrender possession. So again, when the lease expires, that's not a basis to recover possession. If you have a tenant in possession right now on a 1-year lease and they pass this in June of this year, that's a life estate. They can stay there forever. Okay, this is rent stabilization, and the 1-year lease can become a 50-year lease, and you have, according to the words of the bill, you have nothing to say about it. Okay, so if the tenant's violating a substantial obligation of the tenancy, they're using the apartment to run a business or do something that is in violation of the lease, that's a basis for good cause. But again, the same language is there. The obligation can't be imposed for the purpose of circumventing the intent of the article. Okay, again, totally undefined. It's going to would have to be decided by a judge at some point, and different judges decide different things on different days. So again, totally another bomb waiting to be detonated to the detriment of owners. Okay, another one, okay, is I'll talk about owner's use. One of the things that the sponsors and the supporters of the bill said explicitly in the at the Senate hearing on January 7th, and have said elsewhere, is that don't worry, owners, no big deal about good cause eviction. There's owner's use in here. So if you want to take back an apartment, you can take it back, no issue. The assurances of the senators are one thing, the language of the bill is another. If you own a building with 12 or more units, owner's use is unavailable. You cannot recover an apartment for your own use. Between 5 and 11, if you own a building with between 5 and 11 units, you could recover 1 unit for personal use, but you have to show immediate and compelling necessity to do so. If anyone here is a longtime owner and maybe owned an old rent-controlled building, immediate and compelling necessity was the owner's use standard for rent control, for old style rent control. And that's a very, very high standard to meet. And judges rarely found immediate and compelling necessity. So where does that leave you? If you have a building with 12 or more units, it's totally unavailable. Between 5 and 11, it's very, very difficult and would require a lot of attorney's fees, a lot of effort, and a lot of lost time and resources. The supposed bone they're throwing to small owners is if it's below 4 or fewer units, then you can recover. It's easier to recover for personal use. But the bill, the good cause bill, doesn't apply to owner-occupied buildings with fewer than 4 units. So essentially, that allowance to small owners is non-existent. So you have senators and supporters saying, don't worry, owner's use is available. You look at the actual bill, it's virtually unavailable in all instances. Okay. Another basis for a good cause. Occupancy of the housing accommodation by the tenant is in violation of or causes a violation of law, and the landlord is subject to civil or criminal penalties, provided that an agency of the state or municipality having jurisdiction has issued a vacate order. Okay. Let's take the example of if you have a tenant in one of your buildings operating an Airbnb, a short-term Airbnb, for daily rental. Okay, that's already illegal under state law. But how does the city normally enforce violations of Airbnb? They issue violations to the owner usually, right? And they tell the owner to stop it, even though it's the tenant who's doing it. Okay, they don't issue vacate orders. But that's the city on the one hand. On the other hand, what the good cause bill is saying is that unless there's a vacate order, you can't evict that tenant who's Airbnb-ing his unit for whatever per night he's getting. So on the one hand, you have an illegal use that you can't do anything about. On the other hand, if the neighbors are complaining, they complain to the city, to the Office of Special Enforcement, then you have the Office of Special Enforcement issuing violations. You can't do anything about it. You can't evict the tenant. I don't think any drafter of this bill thought about that at all. But it's just, again, one of the ways in which the bill is so poorly drafted. And something like this, I don't know if it's a matter of poor drafting or if it's a matter of just wanting to stick it to owners as much as they possibly can. I kind of go back and forth. I don't know which it is, but either way, it's really it's just an absurd outcome. And then if you look at the rest of the, there's a few others that I won't go into, but the bottom line with all of the supposed good cause bases is that to establish any of them, again, even if it's just non-payment of rent, you got to hire a lawyer, you got to go to court, you got to convince judges of what should be basic things in order to get your own real property back. And again, lease expiration is not part of that. So any tenancy currently in possession is essentially converted into a life estate. And
Alex, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Right. So, right. You've said you've been practicing for 20 years, right? So you're in and out of our courts all the time. So how would this, like the scenario you gave before, you get to the end of the lease term, you attempt to pass on, an increase as defined, in this bill. How do you see it playing out in court? Like, what would be, like, how long would a process take, for me as an owner to, deal with the judge to say, look, my increases have, my expenses have increased 8%. And that's why I'm asking for this rental increase.
It's a good question, Ann. And the bottom line is it could take months and months and months. Right now, if anybody's in court right now, that things, even though the moratorium's over, everything is moving at a very, very slow pace. And the calendars are jammed and things are moving very slowly. So, and keep in mind another thing. If you're in this, if you're in New York City passed a right to counsel law for certain tenants who have below certain threshold incomes, and the state, the same brain children behind good cause, are trying to pass a statewide right to counsel without an income limit. So you could have somebody making a couple $100,000, who's violating the lease. And if that state legislation passes, that tenant's going to get a free attorney, while everyone on this call is going to have to pay for their attorney. So, and then when you have all those tenant attorneys, they're going to be very creative. They're going to look at the law, they're going to look at the language, and they're going to make motions, and they're going to tie you all up. And even in civil court, which is supposed to be a summary proceeding, which is theoretically supposed to go more quickly than a Supreme Court action, you can get tied up for months and months. So, and to answer your question, it could tie you up for a long time, even for the most basic questions of good cause.
So they don't even have the capacity, right? I mean, do they have enough attorneys? I mean, enough judges? They have enough courtrooms? They have to make this workable?
No. And keep in mind also, you're gonna have this. You're also gonna have your standard, everything pre-existing relating to rent stabilization, right? So you have all those cases as well. You're gonna add because typically in a lease expiration holdover, the only issue is, okay, when can you get out? And ideally you sign a stipulation. If they need another month or two, you sign a stip, and they pay use in occupancy, and then they leave. And it's a very simple matter. But that's not going to exist anymore. The tenant's going to be able to stay forever if they want to, as long as they pay the rent, as long as they don't break the law. So the way I've been characterizing it is, this bill would give virtually all the benefits of ownership to tenants with none of the responsibilities. And by contrast, owners would have all the obligations of ownership with almost none of the benefits of ownership. And I think that, really kind of crystallizes it. And if there's one thing you remember from today, that should be it. It's really kind of just turns property ownership and the landlord-tenant relationship on its head.
Right. And I, that might be a good segue to just, fill you all a little bit, on what SPONY is doing. We often speak to lawmakers, and, they are, signing on to this legislation and saying, I support this, but they don't often understand what's in the bill. So, a small owner will say, some of the things that Alex has said here about how this could play out, and they they act surprised, or say, oh, I never thought of that. But, oftentimes it doesn't make them, change their mind, at least to us on the phone, or in the middle of a Zoom call. But, for those of us, on the call that, are, obviously operating in that, this industry, it's really important, that who your lawmakers are. I mean, that's kind of the first thing, right? I mean, you need to know where you vote and where you're running property, who the local state assembly person is, who the local state senator is. These people are incredibly easy to reach now, through the internet. You just Google, your address and it'll tell you, who your elected official is. And, you need to reach out to these people, it could be by email, it could be by phone, and say, hey, listen, I work in the real estate industry, and this bill, is going to impact my ability to operate and to earn a living. And, did you think about, all the, the implications of a bill like this? I would encourage you to, join SPONY. We try to, several times a week, we're reaching out to lawmakers. We have many members that are willing to speak to the media, which in the past, many owners, were always reluctant, because most people despise landlords, right? But, it's time for people to kind of stand up and say, this is not a, this is a, we're providing an essential service, and you can't vilify us, because if you destabilize us, the outcome for the tenants is not going to be good.
Right. And just to build on something that Ann just said, when a lot of the elected representatives, when SPONY or others speak to them, and you hear them speak in the press, some of them will say, oh, Eric Adams just said this. Oh, I support the idea of good cause eviction. It's like people, and even legislators, people who are elected to look at these bills, analyze these bills, and assess the pros and cons, and figure out how it's going to affect the people they're elected to represent. They don't understand. They don't understand what they're voting on and what they say they're supporting. They support general ideas. They support, oh yeah, you should have a good cause to evict somebody. That sounds good. That sounds like a good slogan. But the problem is, when you actually look at the bill, the understandings of what's in the bill are well, I should say the generic understandings are totally contrary to what's in the bill. For just as one example, there's kind of been a shorthand that's developed that has, you see in the press that it's a 3% rent cap. That's not accurate. That's like people playing telephone. Like someone said, there's a 3% limit in the bill, and therefore it's a 3% rent cap. That's not what it is at all. A 1%, a 0.1% increase can be unreasonable and can be disallowed. So to kind of build on what Ann said, it really is like anything else in politics. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you're not loud, if you are not burning the telephone lines of your local elected representatives, then they're going to assume that there's no opposition or that there's little opposition. You have to be loud. You have to make yourself heard loudly and repeatedly. There's
Alex,
really no other way to put it.
And I'd like to add to that. It's Margie Russell, which is, and so which representatives do we reach out to? And I think it has to go beyond those in New York City. It's Suffolk County, it's Nassau County, Westchester, Dutchess County, because New York City is a company town, and what we produce are buildings and the operation of buildings, and the employees commute from the far off outer boroughs, and so it's getting in touch beyond the usual New York City group of legislators, and even as far as upstate, because anyone doing having a small business upstate that is supported by the building industry here in New York City, they will be affected. So I think plenty of us can think about all the contractors that will not be employed because there's no reason to get that apartment in shape again, or to, and so forth. All the rehab that goes on into a building, those contracting jobs will be lost. Buildings will shy away from improving the building service workers' standard of living because they're losing money. So there's the applications that'll go into 32BJ to say we're having financial hardships and therefore we can justify reducing staff and so forth. And so if you want to expand on that a little bit, Alex or Ann, please do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, we do meet with lawmakers all over the state, right, because, the laws that are being passed in Albany will impact, the whole entire state. And, some people are a little more, those that are on the housing committee, I mean, I would say that's always a good place to reach out. If you Google, New York State Senate Housing Committee, the list of the, dozen members that are on the housing committee are all listed there. You'll see if it's you might notice your own state senator's name, or at least a name you recognize if, say, you live in Nassau County or Suffolk County and you see, a senator's name that you often see in the press. They are kind of the first people to reach because, if the bill is going to move, it's going to move through the committee. And, those housing committee members will be voting first to move it past committee, which would then bring it to, the floor to be voted on. So the same on the assembly side. So, that's a good place to start, but it's, each member has, would be voting on this if it comes to the floor. So, it doesn't matter whether or not your local state senator or assembly person is on that committee. They need to know, that you are not in support of this bill.
And I'm sorry, Ann.
And
yeah,
I think we can pull the bill up because there is a question, Alex, to make sure that everyone can see the bill, and we have it in chat.
Yeah. It was somebody posted a question. I just saw, is this the bill? And it's right. S3082. So if you click on that link, that's the bill. One thing just to build on what Ann and Margie have just said regarding pressure on legislators. One of the notable things that I saw when I testified was that a couple of the suburban Democratic senators from Long Island, Senator Kaplan and Senator Skoufis, were very concerned about the effect good cause would have on local tax revenues. Because if this were to become law, what would happen to local rental properties with current free market apartments? Their cash flow would go down, and therefore their assessed value would go down. And as a result of that, the tax assessed against those properties would go down. And what would that do? That would affect schools, that would affect police, fire, and all of the other local services that local governments and the towns in Long Island and Westchester and elsewhere in the state provide. So if anyone here is not in New York, well, whether you are in New York City or not, it applies to New York City also. But especially if you were in the suburbs, that I found it very notable that was a concern that was expressed by more than one senator. And if you live in Nassau County or Westchester or Suffolk or somewhere else, that I think would be a very good item to raise to your local assembly person and senator as a good reason to oppose a good cause eviction. Because if tax revenue goes down, that's somebody's going to have to make up for it somewhere. Somebody's got to pay the teachers, somebody's got to pay the police, somebody's got to pay all of the local pay for all the local government services.
Alex, I have a question since you just mentioned single family homes. So I own a single family home in Nassau County. If I have to leave, the state or the country for a couple of years to work, right? Mm-hmm. And I put a tenant in my home. Mm-hmm. And then, I return, right? So how easy is it going to be for me to get occupancy back.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. So you have a single family home in Nassau County. Okay, so let's not to make everybody's eyes glass over, but I want to read a couple of definitions, right? Because all of these terms that are in the bill are defined. So the term housing accommodation means any residential premises, including a mobile home or land in a mobile home park. So I'm assuming, and assume no one here owns a mobile home. So if you just look at that first part, housing accommodation means any residential premises, period. Then if you look at applicability, if you look at to whom or to what provision, to what housing accommodations the bill applies, this article shall apply to all housing accommodations, meaning all residential premises, except owner occupied premises with less than 4 units. So, Ann, if you are renting a single family home, but you don't live there,
I'm not occupying it.
eviction applies to that single family home. So if you go away for 2 years and you say, okay, I'm after those 2 years are up, and you say, I'm back, I want to live in my house again, and your tenant says, nah, I don't feel like leaving, your tenant is going to win in court. As absurd as that is.
Yeah, I have a question. My name is Greg Carlson. I'm the president of NYARM. This particular bill has a different trajectory than others. In the past, we would be concerned when you had the same as in both houses. Then it might have a possibility of passing. But in this particular bill, there has been a few upstate municipalities and localities that have passed a similar good cause bill. In addition, you have a very organized and well-funded support, or tenant support of this bill who are really pushing it. So it's really a different animal than we have been used to in the past.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, no, those are great points, Gregory. So a couple of things. First, those local municipalities upstate passed their own versions of good cause as a way to try to build momentum, right? Say, oh, look at all this. There's this groundswell of support. It's a movement that, you got to get on board because this is what all the cool people are doing, right? So they did it in Kingston and Poughkeepsie and the city of Albany and Ithaca, and you better get on board. You better get on the train or else it's going to run you over. A couple of problems, as you might imagine. There's a couple of problems with that analysis. Number one, and this actually, again, gets very technical. I actually wrote about this for the New York Law Journal in connection with the city's attempts last year to try to impose commercial rent control. But local municipalities in New York State do not have the power to enact local rent control legislation. And I believe the city of Beacon, and there's maybe one or two others, have kind of stepped back and said, whoa, I'm not so sure that we have the power to do this. And I believe also that the city of Albany's law is being challenged on that ground, among others. So, that's, it's something of a fly or a whole family of flies in the ointment for the proponents of good cause eviction, right? And as far as the other lobbying activities, like I heard a couple of weeks ago that the tenant activists were banging drums outside of Kathy Hochul's office at 5 a.m. and, you better, this is, we want this, and we cannot, we can't live without it. There is an eviction crisis and you have to resolve it by passing good cause eviction. I look, at the end of the day, politicians, a lot of the Democratic politicians are in primaries. And if they feel like they need to bow to the left-wing base, if the polling is such that they feel vulnerable, that might increase the chances of this passing. One thing that I've kept hearing, I've heard more than once from different sources, is that the chances of good cause eviction passing hinge on whether Senator Brian Kavanaugh on the Housing Committee, whether he feels he needs to pass it to stave off the primary opponent to his left. If he feels like he needs it, then apparently this thing is going to become a law, and we're all going to suffer from it. And all of you on this call are going to have this inflicted on you so that Brian Kavanaugh can win a primary. Now, it sounds, for me to even say that, it just sounds completely absurd. But I've heard it from more than one person and from different sources, and that's kind of it's alarming that that's the level of what we're dealing with here. But unfortunately, that's what we're all subject to.
Well, to be nice, Kavanaugh is a character. No. So I do believe. So I was trying to be nice. So I do believe what you say.
Yeah.
So, this is Margie Russell. So, just to confirm, so this applies to single-family homes as well, because that would mean then every single family homeowner could rise on this.
If it's not owner occupied. Well,
that's what I mean. But yeah, if it's not owner occupied, but it means, you buy a house, you always hope, like Ann said, you have the ability to go someplace and rent your house and come back to it whenever, it all works out. And so you lose that entire option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, look, if this were to become law, it would, you could always make arguments about the language of the statute, but as I read the statute, or as I read the bill, if it's not owner occupied, if it's for investment purposes, then it applies. I don't know. I could make some convoluted argument to say it doesn't apply, but I don't know if it would prevail.
And so one of the building of wealth was a young couple starts out with a small property, a condo, a co-op, whatever. They move up to another one, rent that out. So that has been a basic building block of earning wealth from a very small beginning. And
Margie, you're speaking, I guess, logically. You're speaking how I would guess most rational, normal people would think about real estate ownership. That's certainly how I've personally thought about it, and that's certainly how I think pretty much everyone on this in this Zoom has thought about it. But remember who the sponsor of this bill is. It is self-described socialist Julia Salazar, who stated in The Real Deal in 2019 words to the effect that owning private property is removing property from the collective. Okay, so in Julia Salazar's world, it is not an exaggeration. Again, I don't want to offend anybody politically. If anyone agrees with Julia Salazar, it's not my intent, but I think I'm just stating a fact that Julia Salazar would be very happy if the ideas of property ownership in Cuba or Venezuela or North Korea were imported to New York State.
Yeah, you're right. We've had, a couple of very frustrating conversations with some lawmakers, particularly the last few months. And, some of the things that we've heard was, when asked this question, is there room for private housing providers, in in the housing sphere. And they say for now. And the reason they say for now is because they believe in this concept of decommodifying housing, so that, like the example I gave of my husband's family, immigrant, penniless, uneducated immigrants worked super hard and, were able to make a living as a landlord because the language barrier was not so tough. You figured out a way to communicate, right, with your tenants. You found an electrician and a plumber that spoke the same language as you. And that's how you kept your building running, and then you taught yourself how to do those things so that you could, do them on your own. And, in a world of decommodified housing, there's no room for all of us that are on this call, that are, running property, because, if it becomes decommodified, there's going to be no room for, those of you that are on this call that are running your own property management firms, because it's going to be these corrupt, third party, supposed nonprofit groups, that will run all the property that now belongs to the collective. And it's kind of like a NYCHA model. And we know, what NYCHA housing looks like, as opposed to, the decent, quality housing that we are all owning or operating.
I think Joyce.Holland wants to add something to this concept. Joyce, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. So, there were a few things that I wanted to address, from all the comments. And first of all, the wealth disparity for minorities, I need to speak to. So the Black, Latino, Chinese are just getting in this game, if you will, in the last 100 years or so. And immigrants. So my family has owned property for, I think I want to say 70, 80 years, generational wealth we're talking about. And what is happening slowly but surely, we're being lopped off at the knees, and we're not able to maintain. I know personally several owners, Black and Latino owners, who are on the verge of losing their property. This will seal the deal in terms of removing them from generational wealth. That's the first thing that I'd like to address. The face of ownership is always white, and that's not the fact. Everyone's not white who is an owner. And what they're trying to purport is that owners are, taking advantage of minorities. And that's simply not the case. So let's, be clear about what all of these laws, including first of all, the law from June 2019, the ASTPA laws, which was the beginning of the bloodletting. Let's be clear that what is intended is to take us out of our wealth, or say, I don't want to say wealth, because as we all know, we're not wealthy, but it's to remove us. So let's be clear about that. And I think that that's what I'd like to address. And by the way, I am a SPONY member and a board member of SPONY. And so that's one of the major reasons why Margie asked me to speak. Margie?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Joyce. I'd like to call on Andrew Gross from Ogden Properties. Hi there.
Has there, do you know if there's been any mention of a public hearing, or have there been public hearings regarding this bill?
Yes, there was a public hearing on January 7th. I testified at it, and if you are interested, I can, it might take me a minute, but I can pull it up and send you a YouTube video. I mean, it's only of my testimony and my questions, but I can at least give you a flavor of what I said, as well as the my written testimony that I submitted afterwards. But there was it was an all-day hearing.
Right, and it is on the state website.
It
The
is,
state
okay.
Senate, yeah, they record all of their hearings. So, you know, it's under the Housing Committee, and the date, as Alex said, was January 7th. So you could find it, and right, it was 8 or 9 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Right, and we had a
It was.
SPONY member, you know, that testified as well. And then later that day, you know, was attacked on Twitter by, you know, a state senator, you know, on her own personal Twitter account. You know, she came after him, and, you know, that was chilling, right? I mean, if you're, you know, you're a resident of the state, you know, a business owner, you know, speaking out, you know, to elected officials about how this bill would impact your business, and that's what happens. And that's why landlords, owners are often very reluctant, you know, to speak publicly, you know, either to the media or to lawmakers, because, you know, they can turn on you, right? And your reputation and your livelihood are impacted.
And just to build also at that hearing, to build on one thing Joyce mentioned when she just spoke, one of the advocates for good cause eviction, I mean, maybe it shouldn't have been shocking, but it was very shocking to me to hear, to actually say that good cause eviction should be a form of retribution against white landlords. Like, she explicitly said this. And I mean, it's just to look at the SPONY membership, right? It's New York City in a nutshell. It's diverse people from all over the world come to this country, come to New York City, own property as a means of realizing the American dream, for generational wealth, to provide for themselves and their families and their grandchildren. And it's just, there is this thought in the thought, you know, process, that we're just gonna stick it to this straw man that we're gonna imagine. And it's just again, shouldn't have been shocking, but it was.
I'd like to take one more question. If EBD would identify yourself, your name and your company, please make your comment or question.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's Eric Dillenberger from SPONY as well. And I wanted to address some things that I saw in the chat. Somebody made a comment that they said downstate legislators don't really care about owners' property rights. And I can tell you that that might be the case. But there are plenty of districts where they do. And the big thing that they do care about is being reelected. Like Alex said, Brian Kavanaugh is being primaried, and everybody's acutely aware of the pressure that the primaries are going to put on these people. The primaries this year are June 28th. I think I'm not positive on the absolute deadline for registering. I think it might be the 3rd of June if you aren't already registered with a party. And it's critically important that you make your voice heard there, because it's one of your first lines of defense. The other thing, there was another question about commercial good cause eviction. I can tell you that we met with Yuleen Yu in New York City. She's an assemblywoman primarying Brian Kavanaugh, and she had her own version of good cause eviction, effectively commercial rent control directed in the late part of 2019. So this is out there, and they are try to push that as well. So and Alice, I want to thank you so much. I watched your testimony during the Senate hearing. It was fantastic, and I'm very grateful for you doing this. I do think a question for you, and that is, RSA, the Rent Stabilization Association, at some point termed good cause eviction universal rent control. Do you think that's a fair name for it?
Well, Eric, first of all, thanks for the kind words. Yes, I do think that's fair. And I think I may have gone into this a little bit when I spoke earlier. It's not rent control in the sense that the rent guidelines board comes out every year with 1% and 2% increases and says, okay, well, you can only raise it this much for a 1 year, this much for a 2 year. It's not rent control in that way, or what you would normally think about in terms of rent control, there being a hard cap. It's rent control in that no rent increase can be unreasonable, and unreasonable is totally undefined. It does have the 3%, 1.5 times CPA standard for there being a rebuttable presumption. Theoretically, an owner could overcome that if there was, the roof collapsed or something happened and they needed to raise the rent to pay for it. But it is rent control in that you are not free to raise the rent to what the market will bear. And you have to always think about, even for the smallest rent increase, do I want to set aside attorney's fees and resources and time to have to justify this increase? Or is it simply better to just leave the rent at the current level so I don't have to deal with the headache? So to answer your question, it's not rent control in the traditional sense, but it absolutely is rent control.
I do have a follow-on question for the general membership here, which was raised by I have several family members who are both active and in reserve military duty. And they pointed out to me that good cause eviction would affect them disproportionately in a bad way. I don't know how many of you guys have family members that are in the military or either in the reserves or active, but they pointed out to me that often they would get posted to remote locations away from where they bought their houses at almost no notice. And their only recourse was to rent their home. And then they were either on military base housing in the place where they got posted, or in some cases, if they weren't married, bachelor officer quarters. And he explained to me, he said, these guys have no idea what's coming for them. This is a terrible thing.
Eric, that is such a very good point. And it goes to every owner, private homeowner in New York State, because it freezes them. It freezes them from movement, and it's going to turn the value of every private home in New York State down. So even if someone says, doesn't affect me, I'm not ever going to rent my house and I'm going to stay here till I die. Well, the value of your home will shoot down because the value of all the homes across the board will make them less viable as a real estate investment. And so I think that is a real big picture that we have to look at. Even if you want to stay in your home for the rest of your life, what you are looking to turn over to your offspring or to do reverse mortgages so you can live there, the value will be less. And so it is going to affect every single New Yorker who either hopes to own or does already.
And Eric, that's, we talked earlier about reaching out to elected representatives. That's the type of sympathetic story that should get the attention of someone who maybe is on the fence or doesn't really care one way or another. But when they hear a story like that, that could very well could cause someone to say, hey, wait a minute, what the heck is this about? What are you talking about? Like, that would really happen? Like, I got to look at this. This is absurd. So I think those are the kinds of stories that need to be out in circulation, that need to be in articles, that need to be on blog posts, that need to be in chat rooms like that. Those kinds of stories have to be out and in the general circulation, and they have to be known by the elected representatives.
Thank you. Alexander, on that note, we're going to close the meeting, and we will all gather again on this topic in another month. NYARM has our webinars every Friday and Tuesday at noon, so please watch the boards for that. And thank you, Alex from Rosenberg Estis. Thank you, Anne from SPONY. Thank you, Joyce from Dutch Atlantic Development. Thank you all for participating. We will get this out on YouTube shortly.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Margie.
Take care. And I posted my information in the chat. If anybody has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out.
Right, and I did the same. SPONY, we're at spony.org, and then our email address is info@spony.org. So we welcome new members all the time. So thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.